So as I was saying, these abbreviations are okay on the exam. Now you'll notice there's no abbreviation for oxytocin or prolactin. As we are right now, there's no standard abbreviation that's widely accepted across every hospital in the entire country. So you have to spell out prolactin, you have to spell out oxytocin. But your anterior pituitary hormones, MSH, the melanocyte stimulating hormone, the follicle stimulating hormone, the luteinizing hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, prolactin, the little I is silent, and then growth hormone. Posterior pituitary, antidiuretic hormone, and oxytocin. So get to know these, get to know Ms. Flatpig very well, because like I said on the exam, you're going to be asked for the anterior pituitary hormones. So write them out in this order or any order you like. So if it marks it wrong, don't panic. Don't send me a bunch of emails. I'll go back and fix it for you. If I ask you for the posterior pituitary hormones, same situation there. If you don't spell this one out, or if you do spell it out, it may or may not mark it wrong, but I'll go back and fix it later. Now, I've had some people in the past write oxy for oxytocin. That is not going to be right, because oxy could mean oxygen. I don't know. So be sure you're spelling out oxytocin and prolactin all the way. Some places I've worked in a couple of hospitals that use PRL as an abbreviation for prolactin. I haven't been marking that wrong if anyone puts that on the test, but it's not widely accepted, so I don't usually put that down there. So most of these medical terms we're going to be using this semester. If you know one that's different than one I teach, then it's still correct if you use it instead of the other one. I know most of them, so I'll give you credit for it. If I see it and don't recognize it, I'll look it up just to make sure. But I'm going to give you credit if I can. That's the whole point here. Okay. This picture I don't like. I put it here just so you can see what a crappy picture looks like. This is the one that's going to be used on the exam. So when you see this picture, I may have an arrow, or I may ask you to click or touch on the anterior portion or the posterior portion. So this dark side here is the anterior portion of the pituitary. All these little purple granules are making all of these, come on now, all these hormones here. So this is actually making these hormones in here. So that's why this looks purple. Now the posterior side looks white, and that's because ADH and oxytocin are made in the hypothalamus. And then the neurons from the hypothalamus come down to the posterior pituitary. And those axons that are coming down from the hypothalamus are myelinated. So why this all looks kind of white in color, you're seeing the myelination. So ADH and oxytocin are made in the hypothalamus and then transferred down the axons to be stored in the posterior pituitary. That's going to be very important on this test, and if you're in lecture, it's going to be very important in the lecture test as well. You have to know, and if you're going into patient care, you'll have to take boards to get into your advanced or your professional schools, and then you'll have to take boards to get out of the professional schools, and they love this stuff, all about the hormones. So ADH and oxytocin are made in the hypothalamus, and then they're transferred down the axons to the posterior pituitary to be stored and released. So if I asked what's released from here, ADH and oxytocin. If I ask what's made back here, nothing. As far as we know, there's still research going on with all this stuff, but as far as our intelligence takes us right now, nothing's being made. It's just being stored. All right, and I've got all fancy and fluties in here now. I meant to mention this a moment ago as well, and forgot. So this whole thing, the pituitary gland, technically is the hypophysis. Now, I'm not asking you to show off on this exam. If I ask you to identify this gland, pituitary gland is fine. If you want to put hypophysis, completely up to you. Same thing for these two. If I ask what is this over here, you can write anterior pituitary, or you can write adenohypophysis. Either one's fine. Same thing back here, posterior pituitary neurohypophysis. So you don't have to show off on this exam. These words are just fine. All right, so that should be all that we need for that. So, oh dear, no, we'll come back to that later. So now we're going to move down into the anterior neck where we have the thyroid gland. Now, inside the thyroid gland, we have different types of cells that we're going to look at in just a second. We have the follicular cells and then the parafollicular cells. So the follicular cells are making the thyroxine and triiodothyronine. So that's T3 and T4. And T3 and T4 are okay on the exam. You don't have to try to spell these unless you just really want to. Now, the parafollicular cells make calcitonin. Now, of course, in lab, you don't need to know exactly what calcitonin does. This is here kind of helping out with lecture if you need extra help. But all you need to know is by looking at this, you need to know that all of this out here is thyroid, and this here is parathyroid. If we get closer, you'll need to know that these cells going around here are the follicular cells. Each of these is considered to be a follicle. So the follicular cells surround the follicle. The parafollicular cells are groups of cells between the follicles. So follicle cells going around here makes T3 and T4. These areas here, you can call it parafollicular cells or you can call it C cells. And C stands for calcitonin. So the way this is going to look on the exam, you'll have this picture. I'll probably have an arrow pointing at one of these cells here. What is secreted here? T3, T4. What organ is this or what gland is this? It's thyroid gland. If I have an arrow here, I'm asking you to identify the structure. This is the parafollicular or C cells. So either one's okay. Then I ask you what is secreted here? It's calcitonin. Now, if this, looking at this picture, you're like, all right, I don't know what I'm looking at. When I was going through undergrad, I didn't do very well in class. I'd have horrible ADHD. Anything shiny gets my attention and I forget what we're talking about. So I had to make up my own ways. I'd like sit through class, try not to fall asleep. And then after class, I'd teach myself my own way. So the way I thought of this is all this out here is the rich neighborhood. They all have swimming pools. I live over here behind the wall in the poor neighborhood, looking over all the people with their rich people swimming pools. So the thyroid is the fancy area with the swimming pools. Over here where I live is the parathyroid, no swimming pools. It's stupid, but it worked for me. I've passed the test or two, so use it or think of your own thing. So I went, oh, that's another thing I'm going to say. Don't worry about simple cuboidal ET. I'm not going to ask you that. You may need to know that in the future, but that's just here so you understand what you're looking at. When we're looking at this stuff in lecture, you're going to see that this area is called colloid, but I'm not asking you for colloid on the exam, so don't worry about that. And just these couple of things I told you about. So T3 and T4 are secreted from these cells around the swimming pool, and then parafollicular C cells secreting calcitonin. We'll get to parathyroid in just a second. All right. This picture is here to kind of help you study based on what I've told you about already. So you can kind of take a guess and then click the button when you have it on the presentation mode, and these words will fly in to let you know if you got it right. So like I told you, all the swimming pools out here, this is all thyroid. This area over here is all the parathyroid. I don't know if it was just me, but I don't have seasonal allergies and this pollen is killing me. All right. I'm sure people that actually suffer are having a rough year. All right, so now we're looking at from the back. If we remove all the bones, all the tissue, what we see is the pharynx here. We'll learn about that later in the semester. This is the back of the thyroid. So we see these little dots are the parathyroid glands. So from the parathyroid glands, we're secreting the parathyroid hormone, or PTH, or sometimes it's called parathormone. I've never seen it called that anywhere except for textbooks. So PTH or the parathyroid hormone, whichever one you want to use. What we're looking at here is an extreme close-up. So all these dark purple cells are the chief cells. Chief cells secrete PTH. When it looks pink and puffy, those are the oxyphil cells. I'm not going to ask you what the oxyphil cells secrete because we don't know. We know there's some PTH being secreted from here, but overall, it's still being researched. This is the picture that I'm most likely to use on the exam. Yeah, sorry, oops, I hit the wrong button altogether. There we go. And I'm most likely to use this subset on the exam because it really stands out. You can see the pink really well, and you can see the purple really well. So you might get this entire picture, so it gives you a good clue about what you're looking at without all the words. And then I'll point to either this or this. So the chief cells secreting PTH, and then the oxyphil cells. So this, I feel like you'd be lost if I just threw this on a screen somewhere. All right, so expect this one on the exam. All right. And if I'm going too fast, you have any questions or anything, feel free to jump right in. I turn my microphone and the speakers all the way up in case you say something. So don't let me leave you behind. Don't feel bad about slowing us down. You're not slowing us down. We have plenty of time. All right, this is a very bad picture of the thymus. So now we've moved down to the bit of glandular tissue that lies over the heart. And I don't like this picture. I'm not going to use it on an exam. So the reason this is still here is because I forgot to move this word to the next slide. So when we look at the thymus, I'm going to ask you what hormone is secreted. The main hormone that's secreted from the thymus is thymosin. So this is the one you will see on the exam. So this one to me, it always looks like a leaf with really big white spots. Come on, here we go. No, they're going to be covered, lecture and lab cover pretty much the same thing. Some of these pictures you see are going to be similar. We're going to talk about Miss Flat Pig again, because there are people in lecture that aren't in lab, so I'm going to have to completely cover it. So some of the things are going to be a complete repeat. So that's just something you might have to deal with. That's the reason I can have so many days in lab with no class, because I want lab and lecture to stay close together. Because to me, if you know one, it helps you understand the other one better. Enrolled in 2 labs. You need to figure out which one you want and drop one, I believe. Or are you just telling me everything that you're enrolled in together? Oh no, this is one of the things that I've been asking them to fix, and they haven't done it. They kind of make it all look the same. Yeah, and that's what I was saying in the email that I sent over the weekend. They don't split them apart, so we're technically supposed to do lab and lecture together. But I've had to go in and split it up myself because they haven't done it. So you were, let's see, there's 2 labs. That's something we might have to talk about when we finish here. Class type stuff we'll talk about. So, yeah, a lot of it used to be only everyone was all in classes together, but now they've separated it, but they won't separate on the schedules. Very annoying. But don't panic yet. We just started. Yeah, it was at first, but I've accommodated. Noah, you say you are in lecture. Let me see if I saw what it was. It says you're in 2 labs. Look at the entire title for the class, because they look the same, except at the end it will say lecture or lab or laboratory, but the other one won't say lecture at all. So just don't panic now. We'll work through it later on. All right. So let's say, yeah, expect to see this picture on the exam. Looks like a leaf, big white spots. So you have to identify this as the thymus. And you have to identify the hormone secreted here is, come on, Thymosin. All right. Now, using this as a leaf can get a little bit dangerous, and I'm going to show you an example in just a little while. But let's move on to the pancreas for now. So the pancreas, just inferior to the stomach. It's where most of our digestive enzymes are made, so it has a very close connection to the small intestines, as we'll see later. Now, this is a slide that I thought I had gotten rid of, but it's still here. We're looking at a pancreatic islet, which is also called an islet of Langerhans. So you'll need to know that the alpha cells of the islets secrete glucagon, and you'll need to know that glucagon increases blood sugar. Your brain needs a constant supply of sugar and oxygen, or the neurons start to die. So as you're fasting, this is the hormone, where is it now? Glucagon. This is the hormone that keeps you alive while you're asleep. So anytime you're not able to continue eating and bringing in a constant source of glucose for the neurons, then glucagon will be activated to help increase the blood sugar. And it does that by breaking down fat. So it breaks down the glycogen to glucose, or it makes new glucose from various sources that you'll learn a little bit later. So that way the sugar is constantly being fed to the brain so that it can keep you alive while you're asleep or while you're just not eating during the day. So alpha cells, glucagon increases blood sugar. You're going to be asked that question and this next one throughout this semester because it's that important. All right, now the beta cells here are secreting insulin. The job of insulin is to decrease blood sugar. And then you'll need to know where sugar goes when it's decreased. Well, the only place sugar is really, really useful in the body is inside the cells. Once we get glucose inside the cells can start breaking it down to make ATP, which keeps us alive, this energy for the body, but it goes through several other processes as well. So what you need to know, beta cells secrete insulin. Insulin decreases blood sugar, and when blood sugar is decreased, it goes inside the cells. If you find sugar in the urine, then you have diabetes. Sugar should almost never be in urine. All right. Now, this is a picture that I put in here a long time ago. And I used to tell my classes this is a picture of the pancreas, but it's not. What I wanted you to see here are sticks with berries. These berries are called the acini. Acini, and this is a particular peppercorn plant that grows on a hillside in Italy. Acini in Italian means peppercorn. So if you look at these pictures, you'll see a stem with a bunch of berries attached. All of these little berries and all this area here, they're called a sinus, a sine, a chini, a siner. I don't know how you pronounce them, and nothing ever really definitively shows how to pronounce it. But that's where these cells out here get their name, from this pepper plant. We'll worry more about that when we get to the digestive system. The only thing we're worried about right now is the islet. When we get to the exam, you can write islet of Langerhans, you can just write islet, you can write pancreatic islet, or you can write IOL for islet of Langerhans. So this is what you'll see on the exam, and you'll see these lighter looking spots. Those are the pancreatic islets. This is the area where glucagon and insulin are secreted. Sorry. So remember, glucagon increases blood sugar during fasting. Insulin decreases blood sugar by making the sugar go into the cells where it can be used. This picture back here, I skipped over it. I'm not going to use this on the exam. I don't really like it, but you can see there's a lighter spot there. I'm not really convinced with this one, but that's the islet of Langerhans. And come on, this is another shot. So you'll see once again, you don't need to worry about the ducts or the arteries and veins just yet. Just these lighter spots, even this one down here, those are the pancreatic islets, islets of Langerhans. All right. If we're still doing okay, then we'll go ahead and move into the adrenal glands. Now, the adrenal glands can be a little tricky. So visualize here what you're looking at. It looks like almost like a pyramid, but all of this run here is the cortex, and then there's a middle part that's the medulla. For this part, the reason it's so tricky is because there's 3 portions to this cortex. And for every portion, you have to know the class of the hormone and the specific hormone. And yeah, that's it. For the medulla, same thing. You'll need to know the class and the specifics. So the middle part here, the medulla, and that's the other part you have to know, is the cortex and medulla. So this middle part here is the medulla, the adrenal medulla. The class of hormones is the catecholamines. Get the spelling as close as you can, you'll get credit. And then the specific hormones are epinephrine and norepinephrine. On the exam, I might just ask for one of the specifics. So either one of these would work. If you want to put both, that's fine too. But one or the other or both will be okay. Now, when we're looking at the cortex, the thing that I've always used to remember this is GFR. And you'll understand that later in the semester. But it's the deeper you go, the sweeter it gets. So as we're looking at these 3 layers, we have from superficial to deep, the salt layer, the sugar layer, and then the sex layer. So looking at this here, I'm not going to ask you about the capsule, but the zona glomerulosa, zona fasciculata, zona reticularis. Then you get to the medulla. So that's salt, sugar, sex. All right, so what I did was I went through and I put the slide under a microscope and I focused in so that it looked something like this, and I took a picture. And then when I went back through and I separated each region so that you could see all the features that you need to see. So this is what you'll see on the exam. So all this up here is the capsule. I'm not going to ask you about the capsule, but when you get close to the capsule, you can kind of tell sometimes, not this one, some of these cartoon pictures, come on, you can kind of see what I'm referring to. Good gracious. Not this one. Okay. So maybe another, if you look at another slide, you might see what I'm referring to. So close to the outside of the gland, you have the capsule. All of these cells will form into balls. Now, later in the semester, when we start looking at kidneys, there are going to be structures inside the kidneys that are balls of cells, and they're called a glomerulus. So whoever was naming this probably already knew that. I think this comes from a Latin root as well. So they named this section Zona Glomerulosa because of the balls of cells. Now, the reason I refer to this as the salt section is because this class of hormones secreted here is the mineral or corticoids, and salt's a mineral. But the hormone secreted here, aldosterone, deals specifically with sodium. Now, remember, as we're going through this semester, I'm going to say it a million times, water follows the salt. So if you are extremely dangerously dehydrated, this hormone, aldosterone, will be secreted from this section of the adrenal gland. And along with several other mechanisms of the body, it's going to stop the kidneys from making urine. So all of the water that is being excreted by the urine, this hormone will cause it to be reabsorbed. And it does that by using sodium. So when sodium is reabsorbed through the kidneys, water follows the salt back into the body. And we know that salt here we go. Let's see if I can put this together correctly. Salt is always concerned for people with high blood pressure because sodium increases blood pressure because of all the water that's accumulated. So you increase the volume, you increase the pressure. So remember that water follows the salt. And that was all there was. We'll get a little deeper into this and maybe it will make more sense if you're in lecture. If you're not in lecture, we can talk about it more another time if that still doesn't make sense. All right, the next layer is the zona fasciculata. Now, again, whoever was naming this, we had to read their journals in medical school and it was extremely boring. But what they did was they described this section as looking like the fascicles of a muscle. And that's why they named this zone the zona fasciculata. So it kind of arranged in layers or strings of cells. Now, what we're seeing here is a lot of open space, but there's actually fat cells. So there's a lot of glycogen stored in here, so it can be converted to glucose and released. So the class of hormones secreted here, we're in the sugar section, so it's the glucocorticoids. The specific hormone secreted here is cortisol. So when you come in or when you sit down in front of your computer to take your first exam, you should have a lot of cortisol, or if you're worried about what class you're supposed to be in, you should be secreting a lot of cortisol. The purpose of cortisol is it's a stress hormone. So it releases or causes the release of a lot of sugar throughout the body so that sugar can be sent to the brain, sent to the heart and the skeletal muscles, kind of like an epinephrine-like reaction almost. So that sugar is spared for the brain so the brain can have a good source of energy to function properly to figure out how to get you out of that stressful situation. So stress hormone is cortisol, released with your sugar, so we can spare sugar for the brain. All right, the next section, the last section of the cortex, the zona reticularis. Now, a very small section just inside here. This is the adrenal medulla, and this is the end of the zona fasciculata. So the reticularis is the sex section. So the class of hormones, gonadocorticoids, the gonads, of course, are the testes and the ovaries. The specific hormones secreted here are the androgens. And an androgen is considered to be a mostly male hormone. So the androgens are going to lead to the formation of testosterone. But in the female situation, the androgens will be used in several different ways to help create estrogen and progesterone. So although it's a precursor of male hormones, it also helps out with the formation of female hormones. Oh, my throat might make it through tonight. All right, so this is the big picture once again. So we see the capsule going all the way around, the medulla there in the middle. Remember your class of hormone here, catecholamines, the specifics, epinephrine and norepinephrine. If you can't tell just from the difference in color and texture that this is the medulla, look for these big open spaces. These are blood vessels. If you've ever been in a life and death situation, we know epinephrine and norepinephrine is released in large amounts. It's your fight or flight. So it's going to help you figure out how to get out of a situation by fighting or by running. All right, so that hormone has to get into bloodstream immediately to save your life. So blood vessels, very large in the medulla. Now the other sections aren't quite as easy to see here, but these darker spaces here, zona glomerulosa, and the zona fasciculata, the fascicles, and the zona reticularis. Now you shouldn't see this on the exam. It's to just kind of give you an overall idea of what you were looking at there a moment ago. And I then laid all that out for you as well. But remember, those three individual pictures are the ones that you'll see on the exam. So get to know what they look like and how to answer those questions for the exam. All right, there we go. So now we're looking at the testes or testicles, whichever way you prefer to see it. It's good to realize now that if you don't realize already, you should know testicles develop the sperm. So the testicles are essentially a collection of tubules. Inside these tubules, we have these cells that are going to be making the sperm. That is something we'll get into later towards the end of the semester. But for now, you'll need to know that each of these little tube-shaped structures is a seminiferous tubule. And in the spaces between the tubules, those are the interstitial cells. This is the picture you will see on the exam. This one was a little too old and doesn't look that good. So this is what you'll see. So if I ask you to identify this structure or any of these structures, seminiferous tubule. If I ask you to identify these structures, interstitial cells. And if I ask you what hormone secreted here, that's testosterone. And you'll notice the interstitial cells are found at each of the junctions here, just about all the way surrounding each tubule. These little guys here are developing sperm. So if the middle of the tubule there looks a little cloudy, those are the tails of the sperm hanging down. So if these guys aren't being fed a constant testosterone, then you're either going to have a low sperm count or no sperm count, depending on the amount of testosterone being given. You don't need to know all of that yet. That's more towards the end of the semester. I just wanted you to understand what you're looking at and why it's configured that way. So seminiferous tubules, interstitial cells, here we go, making testosterone. All right, so now we'll move on to the ovary. And you do not need to know this whole thing yet. I just wanted to give you a big picture of everything that's happening. Then we'll look at the specifics of what you need for right now. And we'll need to know some of these again at the end of the semester. So this picture here, you will be seeing again next month. But this one, they're going to see the same things plus a few extra things. All right, so this is the first thing you'll need to know. What I've been trying to do on these tests is to make certain words stick out. I'll make them all capital letters, different colors, bold and underlined, because that's caused a lot of confusion, and I don't want you not completely reading the question and make you miss the answer. So if I ask you to identify the structure, and structure will be a different color, it'll be bold and it will be underlined. The entire structure is graphium follicle, sometimes called the antrum. Either word's okay. Get as close as you can with this spelling. Sometimes it's spelled with one A and two F's. The more accepted spelling is two A's and one F. But get as close as you can and you'll get credit. So identify the structure, that's the graphium follicle or the antrum. Identify the feature, that's the oocyte. If I ask you for hormones secreted here, estrogen, progesterone, one or the other or both, you'll get credit. Now, if I don't ask for any of this, I just ask you what gland you're looking at here, that's the ovary. Okay. The next one we have to see, this you will not see on the exam. It's just to illustrate what you're seeing here. This big wad of chewed bubblegum looking stuff here. You could see this picture. I ask you what gland or organ it comes from. So this is still the ovary, but this is the corpus luteum. From Latin, corpus luteum means yellow body. And if you look back at this is the gross look at it. You'll see very yellow. And back over here, you see some yellow inclusions. So corpus luteum. So what we're doing here, we have the graphium follicle or the antrum. You have the oocyte. When this oocyte is ovulated or secreted or ejected, however you want to look at it, all of these cells around here rapidly divide and close in on this hollow area. And that's what you're seeing here. This is what's left of the hollow area. And we'll talk about exactly what this is doing at the end of the semester. It's really kind of neat, I think. But same thing here. If I ask you for the hormones secreted here, estrogen, progesterone, both or either one, you'll still get credit. All right, you don't need this picture for the exam, and we don't need this picture for the exam. So that's the end of the endocrine portion. So I wanted to go ahead. Here you go. Come on out here. Since we still have time before this session ends, I wanted to go ahead and look at the other one. Where'd it go? I might not have opened it yet. But it's going to be the blood, lymph, and immune. It doesn't take very long. Now let me see if I can get this stupid thing to open now. I can't close it out. There. I figure if we can go ahead and look at that, that might save us from having to have class on Wednesday. So you'll be extra far ahead. All I have to do is load the dissection videos. Come on. Computer's been very slow lately. I think it's trying to get revenge on me for some reason. Blood, immune. This should be the right one. Come on. Okay. I think it finally decided to open. This, I think I looked earlier, this is already on Blackboard, so you should have access to it. All right. If it's not showing up, let me know. I'll make it work. All right, so let's go ahead and tear through this. We'll get it done and won't have to worry about class on Wednesday. This is an overall shot of the blood, what you would see if you were to look at a blood smear in the microscope. So you'll notice lots of these little red looking things. These are all the erythrocytes that you'll see here. So all of the red are the erythrocytes. The things that are kind of purpley looking, those are all leukocytes. And then the little tiny purple spots are the platelets or the thrombocytes. So on the exam, I usually try to tell you to stick with erythrocytes and not red blood cells. Either one's okay. Leukocytes or white blood cells are okay. And when you're going through, if you're going into patient care, you'll have to know these as erythrocytes, and you'll have to know these as leukocytes, or everything will be wrong going forward. Now, even if you're going into patient care, these are platelets or thrombocytes, but in patient care, we almost always use platelets. Thrombocytes is rarely used. So know these three types of cells or cell fragments, but also there's an extra thing that is not found in these slides that you will need to know. You'll notice these are kind of a halo or donut appearing. And that is because the erythrocytes are anucleate, means they have no nucleus. So you're going to be asked that on this exam, even though it's not anywhere found in these slides. So be sure you know that term, anucleate, and that's the feature of the erythrocytes, the red blood cells. All right. Now looking at the leukocytes, these things here, and what we're seeing is there are going to be several different types. They all have a nucleus, and that's what's staining there. So you'll need to know these in order of their appearance. So never let monkeys eat bananas. So that's your appearance from most abundant to least abundant. So the neutrophils, lymphocytes, monocytes, eosinophils, and basophils. So there's a few different ways this can be asked. You could be asked to put these in order, so you have to name them. So make sure you know this mnemonic. You might be asked for the most abundant, or you might be asked for the least abundant. So be sure this mnemonic helps you out. Now, we'll need to know each of these individually as well, just by what they look like. We should have, yep, there's the other one. So you also need to know which of these leukocytes are granulocytes and which are agranulocytes. Granulocytes means that they have granules, agranulocytes means they don't. So what I look for is the suffix. If it has "fill," that means they are filled with granules. So they're granulocytes. If they just have cytes, that means they have no granules. So you're going to be seeing something like this on the exam. Now the way I put these on this set of slides is they're in order from most abundant to least abundant. So you'll have this show up on your test, and it'll say identify the cell. So this is a neutrophil, and it might have an arrow, so it'll say identify the cell at the arrow. So that is a neutrophil. We know that because it has several different lobes to the nucleus. They kind of look like boxing gloves, and these things fight infections. So then the next question will be, is this cell a granulocyte or an agranulocyte? Well, since it has "fill" for the suffix, it's filled with granules, although it doesn't show up very well here. So that's a granulocyte. That's the way you'll see it on the exam. All right, this next one, the lymphocyte. You'll notice that the nucleus takes up just about the entire cell. It ends with "cyte," so this is an agranulocyte, no granules. Next one, monocyte, so still agranulocyte, no granules in there. The nucleus for this one usually looks like a kidney bean. Sometimes it looks like a horseshoe. This is probably the exact picture you'll see on the exam. All right, next one, eosinophil. This one I like. It has "fill." It's filled with these red staining granules. Sometimes they don't stain quite as red, but they're still there. And it has a bilobe nucleus. So this one, sometimes this to me kind of looks like a panda. Sometimes it looks like an alien. Sometimes they're a little lower and has a little connection point, so it looks like it's wearing a bra. All right, that's the eosinophil. And then basophil, this is the least abundant. So you won't see very much of this one in a normal blood smear. For this one, lots of granules. You really can't see the nucleus. But if you're familiar with the Greek alphabet, the nucleus usually looks like the omega. But you'll probably see this exact picture of one similar to it. All right, so that's all of the leukocytes. And now we'll look at the spleen. Now the spleen, usually on the left side, just lateral to the pancreas and the stomach. You're not going to be asked to identify the capsule. You'll be asked to identify these things in here, the white pulp. I'm trying to remember which way it goes. I'm pretty sure that the white pulp will be considered the structure and the central arteriole will be considered the feature. That's usually the way I ask that. Now I'm going to give you the big picture. Look here. This picture you probably aren't going to see on the exam, but you'll notice you see these spots all the way through it. That's going to help you differentiate from spleen and lymph node that we're going to see in just a minute. But these little spots all throughout the organ, it's not just found on the edges. So this is the picture you'll see. I ask you to identify the structure out here, white pulp, identify the feature, central arteriole. So what the spleen does is it filters all of your blood. And that's its job, is to be a filter. So it sees all of your blood multiple times every day. And we're going to have a patient case concerning this in lecture. So as your blood comes in, it spills out into this organ. kind of flows through, and it's looking for these spots. So as it's flowing through, we have all kinds of leukocytes around in here looking to see if there's anything infectious. And then when we get to these places where the blood is about to go back into the central arteriole to go back to the general circulation, of course, you can't have any kind of microbes there. That's sepsis and it can kill you. But as the blood is flowing through here, once we get to this area, anything infectious will be caught by this group of leukocytes. Everywhere else through here, it has, if you were with me, if you took Anatomy 1, then you probably saw the reticular connective tissue. So if you remember that, we looked at a picture of the giraffe, and I told you it was a reticulated giraffe because reticular from Latin means net or mesh. So this net or mesh type material out here, if it was a little closer, you could actually see the net. But its job is to catch anything that's too large. So as our erythrocytes are created, they'll flow through the blood, do their job, help deliver oxygen, remove carbon dioxide. These erythrocytes usually last about 120 days. If they are to get damaged, or once they start getting old, they start to swell. And that's when they'll get caught in this net. And then they'll get broken down by the leukocytes. Some parts will be thrown away, some parts will be recycled. But that's how we're filtering the blood. We're taking out things that are large, that don't belong in the bloodstream, that can cause problems elsewhere, and anything infectious. That is not important right now. All right. So on the exam, I ask you to identify the organ as the spleen, structure, white pulp, feature, central arteriole. All right, now the lymph nodes. Now this is not going to be on the exam. It's just here to kind of give you a cartoon idea of what we're going to be seeing. So you may see this, or you could, more likely, you'll see this one. But you'll notice the difference between the spleen. It has these spots all over it. In the lymph node, they're only around the outside. So in this one, you'll be asked with an arrow here, identify the region of the organ or gland at the arrow. So all the way around out here is the cortex. The region inside here is medulla. And a region will be a different color, it'll be underlined and bold so that you make sure you see what I'm asking you. If I ask you to identify the structure with the arrow pointing at one of these, that is a germinal center or a follicle. Either one's okay. I'm not going to ask for capsule. But for these, that structure word will be stood out for you, hopefully. All right, that should be it for that one. Now, for this one, I thought I had removed this because I'm going to use this exact picture. And I'm going to ask you with this arrow to identify the feature. And the feature is this V or U shape here. That feature is a valve. I'm not going to ask you for the lymph vessel, so don't put lymph vessel. That'll be wrong. You're going to be asked for the feature here. That's the valve. You can put lymph valve, or you can just put valve. Either one's okay. All right, so a lot of people are putting this. I don't know why. Don't do it. It's going to be wrong. Just put valve. Even if you're not sure, put valve just in case. All right, next thing then, you'll have to identify some of the lymph nodes, not from this picture. I thought I'd remove this picture. This is too expansive. We don't need that right now. This is the model you're going to be shown on the exam. And you only need to know these 3 lymph nodes that are close to the surface of the body. So around the neck, that's the cervical region, if you remember from Anatomy 1. So there's cervical lymph nodes. The underarm area is axillary, so they're axillary lymph nodes. And then the inguinal lymph nodes are in the crotchular area. All right, so just know, I think I've only asked one of those 3. I'm not sure. Just in case you have a question about it later, see if I have time to quickly talk about this. Yeah. When I have to make these exams for Blackboard, I have to give a bunch of questions. I think the minimum is like 100. So I have to come up with 100 questions, type them all in. It takes a long time and it makes me very angry. But when I go to activate your test, I can put which questions are more important. And then when Blackboard creates the test, it pulls together random questions for each one of you if I click randomize. So that way you might see 2 of these questions or you might see 1 of these questions. It depends on which version of the test you get. So know these: cervical, axillary, inguinal. All right, I don't like this picture, so I don't know why it's still here. This is the one you'll most likely see on the exam. I don't think I have another one. Yeah, I don't like this picture either. I think I've only used this picture. What we're looking at here is a section of the small intestines. So the villi are the little fingers that stick up into the lumen. And that lumen up there is where your food stuff goes through that you've eaten. The villi absorb those nutrients. We're not concerned about that right now. We'll get to that when we get to the digestive system. What is important are these features. And they will be asked as are they asked as features or structures? None of us say it. I think they're structures, but the only thing I'm going to ask from this picture are these purple spots. I'm pretty sure they're structures now that I think about it. So identify the structures. These are the Peyer's patches. So we take in something, you might have had someone say, here, try steak tartare. And that actually happened to me and a friend of mine who's a surgeon in Chicago now. He ate it. I was like, I'm not eating that. I don't know what it is. And the lady didn't know the right word for English. And I looked at it real close and it looked weird. It looked like it's heavily seasoned. And I said, is that steak tartare? And she said, yes, yes, steak tartare. So steak tartare is raw hamburger meat and it's seasoned sometimes, but I wasn't going to eat it. He did. Now, he's lucky it didn't make him sick. But if you eat that raw hamburger meat and it has something in there that's infectious, once it gets to the intestines, all of this stuff's being absorbed. If the bacteria find a way to get absorbed, they'll have to go through these guys here, the bouncers. And if there's something infectious in there, these are leukocytes. They're going to rapidly divide and attack whatever's trying to invade from the intestines. So just an extra way to protect ourselves. But Peyer's patches is the only thing you need from this picture for now. All right, the tonsils. This picture I hate also, but it does okay. This is how you'll be asked, this half head model. So it was too busy when I put all the words in here, so I made them number coded. So this little bit of orange tissue back here at the back of the pharynx, this tube is the pharynx that we're going to learn, I think, in the next section. So attached there is the pharyngeal tonsil. The roof of the mouth is the palate. So this bit here that's connected up here, that is the palatine tonsil. And then ling from Latin means tongue. So the lingual tonsil is attached to the back of the tongue. All right, so know those three from this model. But you also need to know the pituitary gland inside the sella turcica. So that pituitary gland, if I ask it like this, if I ask you to identify some hormones secreted here, you can put any hormone. If I use the histology picture we showed in this last set of slides, you have to differentiate between anterior and posterior pituitary. Here, the hypothalamus, I'm probably not going to ask this because it's not a very clear picture. But back here, this is the pituitary, this is the pineal gland. And the pineal gland secretes melatonin. So the pineal gland sets your circadian rhythm, which is your day and night sleep-wake cycles. Melatonin is your sleepy time hormone. So being secreted back here, stimulated by the pituitary gland. So MSH will come up here to stimulate the formation of melatonin, and then the secretion will come when it's sleepy time. All right, so pineal gland will come, or melatonin, both of these, will come from this picture. Okay. The rest of this set of slides should just be pictures of the models that you'll need for lab. Yep, that's what it is. So if you see this picture on the test, this is a kidney, of course. So that's the adrenal gland. Usually don't ask the questions about the adrenal cortex from this. Those will all be the microscope pictures we saw earlier. But I have occasionally asked this in the past. So know that that middle part is the adrenal medulla. Epinephrine and norepinephrine secreted here. The class of those hormones, catecholamines. All right, this picture is showing the larynx. This will be the Adam's apple, the hyoid bone up here. This is the thyroid glands. T3 and T4 are secreted here. This picture you will not see on the exam. The parathyroid glands, you can't see them. They're little tiny pink spots. I can't see them. I'm not asking them from here. That wouldn't be fair. So just know these from the microscope slide. All right. We have the duodenum here, the first part of the small intestine. So this is the head of the pancreas, if I ask for the region. This is the body of the pancreas and the tail of the pancreas out here near the spleen. All right. We have the thymus here. I don't usually ask from this model. This is usually lying right over the heart. This model has been stolen from all of our labs, so we don't have this anymore. So usually this comes from the dissection of the pig or the microscope slide. So look for that dissection of the pig to be loaded Wednesday. This picture can be a little confusing. We have the rectum back here. This is the vagina, uterus, and the urethra with urinary bladder. So it's female, of course. But that is the ovary. This picture usually does find its way on the exam. So know if I'm using this exact picture, I just remove the word. That arrow is pointing to the ovary. If I ask you for a hormone secreted here, estrogen, progesterone. This picture sometimes shows up on the exam. This one's a little depressing. I'll tell you why in a moment. But of course, that's the testicle. If I'm asking you a hormone secreted here, testosterone. We haven't used this picture much lately. We had these models in class, but someone has stolen all the penises. So this model makes me kind of sad. And I don't understand why, because they're very small. They're barely an inch long. This picture doesn't makes it a little bit proud, but they're very small. So I don't understand why someone stole them. It's only half anyway, so it makes no sense to me. If you do see this picture, though, that's the testicle or testy, hormone testosterone. All right, so I'm going to go back in and update the calendar already. We don't need to have class or lab on Wednesday, so lecture could probably start at the time class usually starts.